Hey, so Owen here again. Welcome back to another of my vlogs. So recently I started a series of these all about what it's like to live with a visual impairment, aimed at answering questions that I receive during my daily life about that exact question. I have always been an advocate for people engaging in dialogue. I think that if we talk more, just in general, that a lot of the world's problems will start to become easier to tackle. I like it when people ask me about blindness and visual impairment. I think it's the best way to learn, and so since I have this platform here to address all of you, I decided to use it to answer these commonly asked questions. There's another of these videos out there. In that I answer 5 questions, and now I'm going to answer another 5. First of which is, are there any drawbacks to being visually impaired? And the straight answer simply is yeah. There are, and look, amongst them there is discrimination. There's difficulties with employment. Education is not as simple as it might otherwise be. You have to tackle your way through things like the NDIS, which is a system that's still being improved as they go along. Going out and just buying equipment is not as easy as it might otherwise be, because obviously we have to get screen readers and other bits of adaptive kit on top of basic things like phones and laptops and so on. But at the end of the day, whilst there are problems associated, or that can be associated with visual impairment, the cons do not outweigh the pros, in my experience. So I'm not saying any of this stuff because I want pity. That's the last thing I'm after. Another question I have received a few times is, do I face discrimination? And look, to be honest, I have dealt with discrimination in my life as a result of being blind, but I'm going to own this. I've also been discriminated against for things other than just my visual impairment. And I think the fact that I'm now a stage performer and have the group of friends around me that I do has cut back somewhat on all of what I have to put up with. But there are people out there who are very heavily and frequently discriminated against, and that's just messed up. It's a lot worse once you get out of the first world, obviously, I think discrimination is something that we can't pretend does not occur, and is not faced by the blind and visually impaired, just as it is faced by many others. And it's something that we should, as a society, do our best to try to combat as much as we can. Another question I get asked is, can blind people dream? And I think that question is trying to ask more than just, can we dream of a world without discrimination? Do we have dreams? And yeah, according to everything I understand, MRIs have been done, EEGs have been done on blind and visually impaired people while they're sleeping, both those who have been born blind, those who have lost their sight through medical conditions, and those who have lost it in other ways, and other people on different levels of visual impairment. And the straight answer is yeah, they all dream. Dreaming is not a visual phenomenon. It is a way that the brain and body processes information that you take in throughout your day or your week, and makes sense of it. Now, what a person who was born blind dreams of, I couldn't tell you, because I haven't lived that experience myself. I do often see things in my dreams that are from my childhood, from the years when I could see. I was able to see for the first 9 years of my life. At the same time, I also have things in my dreams that I certainly never saw in those 9 years, as my brain uses its visual memory to construct new images. I don't know if that's a byproduct of just the fact that I've got an active, you know, imagination, or if it's something to do with those 9 years of sight, you know, giving sort of a groundwork or whatever. But either way, yeah, I dream, and other blind and visually impaired people do as well. And I touched on it there, but one of the other questions I get asked is, can blind people imagine things? Yes, they can. They can imagine a lot. Now, again, for me, having had those 9 years of being able to see, my imagining things is somewhat simpler than it might otherwise be if it's trying to image something, because I should also stress here, imagination can just be imagining a song, and that doesn't need a visual cortex to do. Or at least it doesn't have to. But you know, it's again, impossible for me to tell you what it's like for somebody who was born blind, or in fact for anybody with any other form of visual impairment, because that's not me. However, all that I understand, that I've read about, suggests that studies have shown blind and visually impaired people have very active imaginations, and that there shouldn't be, short of any other form of mental or sensory impairment, a reason that they can't imagine. And another question I get asked, especially if anyone has asked me all the questions, you know, that I've already answered in this and the previous video, is, do I wish to know what the world around me looks like? Yeah, there are times. Sometimes I want to know what various people look like, what various, you know, animals, objects, places. But the fact is, I don't really have many options open to me to find out. There are a lot of blind people who couldn't care less. There are a lot that do want to know. And I don't think that's should be much of a surprise, really. I think everyone's opinions widely vary, and wanting to find out what a highly visual world looks like should be like self-evident, I would have thought. But the thing about it is, especially for somebody born blind, the only way you'd be able to find out how a thing looks, if you don't have the ability to draw on a visual memory like I've got, is even more limited. And yes, you could form an image, but for example, if you know, I was to be handed this, and you to tell me what colours it are, I can map something approximating how this looks colour-wise and shape-wise and so on in my head. A person born blind would be able to run their hand across it and come up with the shape of it, but they wouldn't be able to come up with the colours because they don't have a conception of colour. They've never seen colour. They don't have the visual cortex, you know, telling them that, as far as I understand it. So yes, they could imagine it, but they would imagine it very differently to how you might do that as a person who's got sight. And you know, often people ask, you know, when blind people close their eyes, do they see darkness? Well, how is there relevance in asking about, you know, dark for a person who doesn't have a conception of colour? It's like asking, what does your elbow see? You know, my elbow is resting on a wall currently, but that's as much as my elbow gets. It doesn't have a visual input, and never will do. So if all of you could only see the world through your elbows, then you wouldn't understand colour either. But that's probably a bit too esoteric for the end of this. Sadly though, it is where I'm going to leave it. We'll come back to some more things another time, and if there's any questions that have come up from this that you want answered, feel free to ask. Feel free to, you know, make comments, like, share, tell your friends about this, and always, you know, engage me in conversation if you see me out and about. Engage with me online, and thank you for watching.